In 2020, Apple announced the company would become fully carbon neutral by 2030. Hot on the heels of the news was Microsoft, committing to become carbon negative by 2030. To become carbon neutral, companies have to remove as much carbon from the atmosphere as their operations emit. But to become carbon negative, companies have to go even further, finding ways to capture more carbon than they emit. Both Apple and Microsoft outlined their plans to reach these targets, all with the stated goal of helping reduce global emissions enough to prevent the world from warming by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels. According to a 2018 report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world needs to reduce emissions by about 45% by 2030 to reach this goal. The two tech giants are not the only companies in pursuit of change. Firms from all over the world are joining the cause, investing in renewable energy, sourcing more sustainable supplies for their products, and planting trees to offset their emissions. But what counts towards this goal and what doesn't? How can we monitor who is meeting their commitments? That's where carbon markets come in. Carbon markets are a way for individuals, companies, and even countries to buy credits that help them offset or compensate for emissions that can't be avoided. Many governments and international organizations consider carbon markets a necessary step to compensate for their emissions, while the world's biggest emitters develop technologies that will reduce their direct emissions significantly. In some cases, companies are legally required to buy carbon credits in compliance with laws about how much they can emit. For example, since 2005, the EU has put a cap on how much companies like airlines can emit. If they go over the limit, they have to buy carbon credits through the emissions trading system to avoid fines. And the cap on emissions is periodically reevaluated. Not all carbon markets are legally mandated, though. Individuals, companies, and countries can opt to voluntarily buy these credits to offset the impact of their activities. And there's a lot of money in these markets. In 2021, the voluntary carbon market had already reached $1 billion. According to Ecosystem Marketplace, by 2050, it could reach $50 billion. But where does all this money go? Carbon credits, sold through carbon markets, are generated by activities like conservation of forests, generating renewable energy, and planting trees. But many experts are wary about how effective carbon markets can be. There are concerns that companies can use carbon markets in public relations campaigns while they continue to emit greenhouse gases. And that even if a polluting industry like a coal mine offsets all of its emissions, the people who live around the coal mine will still suffer from the pollution. It's really hard to get countries on the same page about how to regulate or standardize carbon markets. For years, the issue of standardizing carbon trading has come up at the UN's climate summits, known as the COP. In the latest round of talks at COP26 in Glasgow, details of how carbon credits would be counted and exchanged across borders were refined, improving on agreements made in Paris in 2015. During previous meetings, countries couldn't agree on the rules for this type of trade. And some countries, like Bolivia, criticized carbon markets, saying they would create, quote, business climate millionaires. The problem is that without a standardized system, it becomes hard to measure how effective a carbon capture initiative is. The new agreement from Glasgow should help address these issues, but questions remain. For example, a hectare of new growth forest, usually including agricultural plantations, stores much less carbon than a hectare of old growth forest. The former will be cut and renewed in a few years, depleting soil nutrients, while the latter will enrich the ground soil. But who decides how many credits that land is worth, and how is it calculated? Reducing emissions in one place often leads to an increase in emissions in another. For example, Norway plans to help offset its 54 million metric tons of carbon emissions through carbon trading. But it continues to be the world's 5th largest exporter of oil. And protecting a forest in one location can often increase deforestation in another. One review from Utah State University found that even if we planted as many trees and plants as the Earth could hold, that wouldn't be enough to offset all of our carbon emissions. Singapore's voluntary carbon market, which started operating this year, is working to address some of the potential concerns with projects backed by carbon markets. With the help of artificial intelligence, satellite monitoring, and blockchain technology, the market aims to verify, quote, the integrity of our carbon credits. Some experts have suggested focusing on other ways to cut emissions. British band Coldplay announced in October 2021 that their next world tour would have a net zero carbon footprint. To do this, they're developing a suite of alternative energy generation methods to run the shows, including solar power and electricity-generating bicycles that their fans can use. Even so, they can't get rid of all of the emissions that will come from running a world tour, because some things, like long-distance transport, can't be done yet in a way that doesn't emit any carbon. Though renewable energy capacity is growing rapidly every year, we're still decades away from renewables meeting all of the world's current needs. There may be no silver bullet to stop global warming, but scientists agree that a mix of solutions is the way to go, with carbon markets having a role to play.